computers. This is Intelligent Performance.
Lee Bristow, welcome to the Intelligent Performance Podcast. A pleasure to have you with us. You are, of course, the author of the recently published Human AI Alliance, all about meditations for leaders. And to kick things off, I'd love to see your take on what does intelligent performance mean to you?
Hey, Michael. So really great to chat to you this evening. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. In terms of intelligent performance, the way that I interpret that would be basically looking at your performance for the day and thinking about how you can be a better individual on tomorrow. And that could be a combination of using tools like meditation, reflecting on your day in terms of looking at your diary. It could also be using AI to augment your capability, whether it's editing a new video or creating new podcast content or updating the way that you do your job. All of that is intelligent performance. It's using the tools that you have available to you to be a better person tomorrow.
I love that. It's a great point. I think it beautifully leads into this topic in terms of AI. And I think one thing I've noticed in terms of the last couple of years when ChatGPT came to the fore, suddenly everyone became an AI. But tell me, a bit like when Bitcoin was high, everyone was like, oh, I'm a Bitcoin specialist. But tell me, your background is really quite interesting, Lee. Just bring us up to speed as to how you develop this kind of expertise, and specifically how leaders can actually integrate and evolve and adapt their approach to utilizing AI.
So my career spans sort of 20, 25 years in IT, predominantly within reactive AI type systems, focusing primarily in the information security, cybersecurity, and for the last decade or so in risk and compliance, using workflows automation and a level of intelligence to support businesses identify risk inside their organization. Now, all of that was all done in terms of reactive AI. So basically, a set of parameters go in and you know what they are going in and you know what the expectation is when it's coming out from the other side. So it's been around for the better part of 40 years in terms of the underlying technology. So like you and everyone else, when ChatGPT rolled around in November 2022 now, it scared the bejeebers out of me. It literally made my blood run cold. And I was thinking, this is going to be it. And I did. And that inspired me to write a book in December of 2022. So I was sitting in Ireland. I'd recently moved to Ireland and I found myself pretty much alone just before Christmas. My kids were away and things like that. And I decided if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to do something vaguely productive. And I took this concept of the world is nigh and started to write a book. And the outcome of it was pretty clear after about 6 months that there was doom and gloom in terms of the really bad outcomes where AI does become self-aware, because then its motivation will then drive to whatever end it chooses. Right. The problem is we don't know what that is, and we can guess and we can surmise, but the chances are that we'll all be wrong anyway. For me, it became almost like a waste of time to really go into those nuances. And there are way more intelligent people than me that have really spent a lifetime looking at that. And probably one of the best books is Life 3.0, and it goes really into the minutia of those concepts. So I decided to go in a slightly different direction, which was, okay, so how do we not end up there? How do we conceptualize ideas around, firstly, what is intelligence? What do we want to do with that? What is going to be the changes that is going to happen to society from a lifestyle perspective, from a job perspective, from a job security perspective, from an economic perspective, from a safety security perspective? And then from there, I extrapolated up to go, okay, well, what will be the framework that would support a leader deliver at least some sort of change management without going into the, again, details of change management, but just have a plan. How are you going to do it? What are we going to do it? How are we going to move slowly? How are we going to think our way through this? And so that was the thought process and the extrapolation all the way up into trying to design an idea that we could actually end up having an ideal outcome, because I do agree with pretty much all of the sort of the core traditional experts that have been studying this for a decade and a half, that there is going to be massive change, and that November 2022 was a massive pivotal moment. And yeah, everybody better put on their safety belt, because yeah, we're in for a good ride for the next decade.
And I think for laymen like me, not exposed to this, to be able to come in and utilize the technology and for it to be instantly usable, that I think that's the game changer, right, in terms of this space, where it sounds like with your expertise and someone of your backgrounds, AI, normal thing, being able to use it, it sounds like a fairly rigid set of parameters that you're utilizing, putting it in, getting what you expect out, testing it. But when Joe Blow comes along and just starts poking the keyboard, and it's like, oh, wow, okay. And it still gives you something quite useful. That's what I find alarming. Like I used it just last night to create this thing for the business. And I was like, wow, I only typed like 3 lines in. And I was like, punched out this whole thing. And I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, I think so. Let's talk about the leadership perspective. Leaders have a tough job. They often have to know enough so they don't look stupid, but their key job is to actually harness the strengths and the skills of experts. And AI sounds like really they need to know enough about that. We're seeing in McKinsey and Co., they're talking about creating, I think they call them unicorns, people who understand business within their own context and also technology as well. So what do you think some of the top things leaders actually need to be doing or thinking about when it comes to this space?
I think probably one of the biggest areas would be around the governance of AI. Now, this is a really fledgling area when it comes to AI. I think we've got a really good idea in terms of what governance means in terms of information security, cybersecurity, IT systems. You mentioned just before we started recording that you're from an engineering background, so you would be very clued up as well in terms of the body of knowledge and the way of doing something, the way that it should be done. And there is a very kind of set schedule, and that method gives everybody a language with which to speak from and a basis from which to move from. And that provides a level of safety. It ensures that everyone can move at a particular speed, and it also allows for acceleration. And I think in terms of what leaders need, or what we need to develop, essentially are robust frameworks around governance to support the implementation of AI in a responsible way, in an ethical way, that it looks at society, it looks at individuals, it looks at the way that AI is going to impact a particular job, what's going to happen to it, what's going to happen to the people that are in that, what additional skills are going to be needed for them to stay in place, and then how are they going to be reskilled up or tooled up to be able to do something else. I think in some instances, we've seen some dramatic cuts from big organizations as early as 2023 in terms of print media. The bigger ones in terms of IBM made massive cuts. So the ideal there is that we have the governance framework that we can actually then keep each other in check. And it's a tool that we can use to ensure that we do something a little bit better. So I'll give you an example. There's something called the gig economy. I think you probably have heard of this. So yeah, one of the kind of the outlays of the gig economy, in terms of if we're looking at it in the context of, say, fast food that is being delivered to your door in seconds, or not seconds, but within minutes kind of thing. The problem with that is that you end up in a situation where a lot of those Uber drivers, a lot of those Uber Eats, a lot of the, I think it's Kangaroo is another one, they end up essentially as self-employed. So they lose out on a lot of the actual underlying benefit of being employed if they wanted to be. Now, if they wanted to be an entrepreneur and this was a side hustle, then fine. But if it's actually the job that feeds themselves, that feeds the family, that puts the roof over their head, that's not ideal. And so one of the lessons from the gig economy is that, yeah, this creates opportunities. It removes traffic from roads. It provides opportunities for existing restaurants to have another distribution channel. There are massive upsides on all of this, but there is also some downsides. And from a downside perspective, those little nuances do need to be managed because we don't want it to impact too heavily. And that's just a lesson that we can take, we can learn, we can go, okay, fine. So that is an area that we need to manage because we don't want people to be in a position where they're suddenly just contracting at the lowest common denominator.
The tricky thing is that we've got this almost like perfect storm, at least I can speak from Australian context, is that we've got significant levels of disengagement from employees, and employees wanting the same money or more to work from home, have more flexibility, and typically not have matched levels of productivity. So you've got managers going, it's getting harder, I'm paying more. And then this kind of beautiful technology appears to be kind of like, they'll just work whenever you want. They never complain. Hi captain, 3 days full. How high can I jump? It's that wow, it's just like the elixir almost is how it feels. That it's not necessarily just technology, it's also the other market factors, right? It's becoming increasingly uncompetitive. You run a medium to small enterprise in Australia, Aussie wage is just becoming uncompetitive, right? It's forcing you to think about, I'm seeing restaurant businesses where they only work on specific days, they avoiding public holidays because they have double rates and et cetera. So different things like businesses evolving because of these now additional hurdles. So are you seeing that more broadly though, that AI is being blamed, but perhaps actually there's other economic factors at play which are encouraging that transition?
I'm not an economist, so I don't want to speak too broadly into that, but the idea there in terms of the wage increases, my humble opinion around that is a kind of a hangover from COVID when huge amounts of money was pumped into the system. So we got massive inflationary pressures coming through later. So it's basically like the world took out a massive credit card and now we have to pay it back. Everyone's having to work twice as hard for less money in your bank account because it's all going to go back. And so that is causing a little bit of an issue. And then you're also going to get a little bit of pushback from individuals that feel like they're paying back the credit card. And so ultimately, if they're not getting the ability to go to the beach and enjoy an ice cream and drink afterward because there's no money in the bank account, they are going to start working less in terms of that. And that is going to create a perfect storm for the employee to go, okay, if you're not prepared to put in the hours, not prepared to put in the work, the reality is, as a business owner, I'm also feeling it. I'm going to have to go the other way, which is I'm going to have to automate a lot of the processes. And you used the restaurant example, the public holiday ×2 in terms of shift pay and things like that. That kind of work could potentially be outsourced relatively quickly, outsourced to technology. Even if it's just self-service and you're just literally weighing a tray and you're getting it and you're going to go and sit down, there has to be a little bit of effort on the human who's ordering the food. There's a couple of restaurants that are also starting to put in actual robots, droids to come in and actually do stuff. On any kind of mass. It was literally some YouTube stuff that I saw along the way while doing some research. But don't think it's too far away if you have a look at some of the Tesla bots that are coming. From a mass production that somebody like Tesla, not Tesla, but Elon Musk could put in Tesla. It would be, that kind of stuff is relatively scary. And you roll that on top of some of the stuff that's coming out of ChatGPT that we've seen coming out. It will be pretty insane. Just in terms of being able to have that conversation and understand it, whether it, can I have the fish and chips or the burger? Would you like the fries with that? So I don't see it being a very hard jump, especially if there is not a willing and able body that is prepared to do it for a rate that is reasonable. But this is where the leadership component comes in, is actually understanding both sides of that equation, that the owner is having challenges from an economic perspective, that the employees also having the same economic challenges, just from a different viewpoint. And that if you do drop in that droid to come in and do those services, then the outcome is that pretty much everybody loses.
Mhm.
because the outcome of that is that eventually everything will be automated and the restaurant owner won't have anybody to sell to because, again, the economy starts to break down. And again, I'm not an economist, so a lot of this was just picked up in terms of the research component that come through. So what I believe is going to happen is that there will be new opportunities, new jobs that are created. I'll give you a really basic example. This concept of this podcast that we're in, this is 2017, roughly. If you said to somebody in 2016, oh yeah, I'm a podcast, they would look at you like you had just stepped off, I don't know,
Really weird. Sure.
yeah. And so they wouldn't know. And probably before 2012, you mentioned I trade Bitcoin and they would look like what coin from where, what country is that
Yeah.
again?
Yeah, for sure.
There's a blockchain. What chain is that again? So technology changes at such a rapid rate and the opportunities that come from that will not be known until we're on the other side of it. So this is that chasm where it gets really scary and gets really real. But I think that this is such a big technology shift. It's not like we're adding blockchain to an existing, we're not adding another form of robotic process engineering to an existing system, right? We're actually going through quite a big phase shift in terms of our understanding of technology, in terms of its impact on people, on the economy. And so we're going to have to go a little bit more slowly. I think there's also, I think one of the things that I do want to bring it back to anybody from a kind of an entrepreneurial perspective, I think there is going to be a knowledge explosion because one of the things that you said is you could go to ChatGPT or to Google, like, just my mind now, but their AI, type in a series
Gemini.
of Gemini, thank you. Type in a series of questions, put in some guardrails around, don't think about this, don't look at this, don't consider these elements. And it can spit out something that is relatively good. And it's really good for ideation, very good for ideation
Yeah.
in terms of trying to figure out what you're doing or where you're going and that kind of stuff. And when I started doing the original research back in 2022 to early 2023, there was a huge amount of useless information that was coming out. Yeah, it was really imagining weird and wonderful things. But it went literally from a preschooler up to a high school graduate pretty much in the last sort of 2 years. So you can imagine what it's going to do after that.
Yeah.
But if you take some of that conceptualization around ideation, but you bring it into the way that we would want to use it, either in new platforms, new technology, sustainability, new engineering methodologies, utilizing data, using it in project management, I think there is a huge opportunity for new young leaders, new entrepreneurs coming out that are not necessarily going to do rackers for ChatGPT and Gemini, but are more actually interested in the actual underlying business use cases and then leveraging AI to be able to actually deliver something of real value. And I think that knowledge explosion is going to create, a lot of opportunity for young entrepreneurs. And I think, yeah, that anyone that is prepared to put in a little bit of extra hard yard to understand what that is, what that means. And again, you don't need to get into the actual technical minutia. What we've seen in the last 2 years already is that the number of experts that are required to actually run an AI system is astronomical, whether it's
Right.
from a hardware infrastructure perspective to a data perspective to an actual AI expert in terms of developing or integrating uh, robotic process automation into large language model to be able to actually generate really useful content inside a business. It's not easy. It's actually super complicated, and you do need a lot of really strong, detailed, technical people to be able to do that. And the skill set is really wide. So as within that, we need leaders. We need leaders from a safety perspective, from an ethical perspective, but we also need the entrepreneur that sits on top of that, that will go through the ideation, that will test out various ideas around AI. And I think as AI becomes more affordable to be able to start to test these kind of fringe ideas, it will start to create again, a whole host of new opportunity. And using that same analogy of the waiter who doesn't want to work anymore because they're just not getting it, hopefully they're inspired to go and do something slightly different and leverage that knowledge exposure to be able to go into a different line of work. Not that there's anything wrong with waitering. It just, if it's not paying the bills because you've got a massive loan on the credit card, you got to do something else, right?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm curious. There's a mixed debate whether it's going to be Armageddon or heaven. It goes with the two. If it was on a spectrum, it sounds like there is going to be opportunity, but it's also going to be devastating in terms of some people are going to lose their jobs. Some people are going to find a new job. For you, when it comes to drafting a book, especially around meditations for leaders on obviously human and AI, that alliance, what you're talking about, what do you think most leaders are not thinking about but should be?
So maybe I could dial this back a little bit. There are 4 kind of core types of AI. So you've got reactive AI, which is stuff that's been around basically since the turn of the century. In fact, it's been around since ancient Greek. The first analog computer was it's actually called the Antikythera. I think that I'm pronouncing it, I'm probably butchering it, but it was the first analog computer. But the idea there was that you put in a set of parameters and an output would occur. And that's essentially reactive AI. That's an analog example. So it's been around and we lost that knowledge, ironically, for a couple thousand years. And in the last 40 years, we have really had a digital explosion around reactive AI, and pretty much your entire banking system operates on it now. Most of the technology that we're using operates on it almost exclusively. Next level up, your limited memory. So that is basically your large language model, and there are different levels within your limited memory, but essentially it has a retained memory and it is able to leverage that retained memory to create novel ideas ultimately, which is what we've been talking about. Then the next layer up from that is theory of mind. So theory of mind is where the AI system becomes aware of you, but it's not aware of itself. Okay.
Right.
And then the 4th kind, which is self-aware. So that is where the AI becomes self-aware. And the minute that it becomes self-aware, it becomes a self-motivating being. Okay. And it will then define its direction based on its motivation. Okay. And like I said, Life 3.0, the book Life 3.0 goes into a lot of detail on the different scenarios of that self-aware. So I left that particular area alone quite a bit. But there is an area that I think that leaders really should be thinking about, and that is theory of mind, where at least not necessarily that AI becomes aware of you, but what it will be able to do is at least reflect its awareness of you. And I think there is a huge opportunity in that space where you can actually get a human AI line, in the sense that the AI is actually starting to work for you. And it is working in a way that it supports you in terms of your intelligence, your way of working, your being. And I think that there is a huge opportunity within that. I grew up horribly dyslexic and I struggled halfway through schooling. In fact, I ended up in a special school at one point because my teachers thought I was a little bit slow. It took about 2 years of remedial school to realize that I went from basically being one of the worst students to the top student in that remedial school, and then moving out back into traditional school and doing very well within traditional schools again. But it was a resetting and an understanding that I basically needed to stop listening to what my teachers told me and to do what I do the way that I needed to do it in order to be able to get to any level of result. And the theory of mind concept there that I have is that if there was a theory of mind type, let's call it a being for now, that would be able to interpret my best way of learning, the way that I would interpret mathematical formula, or if it would be able to teach me in a particular way, I would be able to go a lot further in math. I would be able to go a lot further in science or geography or history, the subjects that I would be really interested in, and finding ways in which to be able to either memorize or create ideas around how to formulate thinking around a set of events. So I think theory of mind has a huge place. And I think that is also going to be where interaction between humans and AI is really going to set itself apart in terms of actually being able to be really useful. Because
Yeah.
right now you type into ChatGPT and it gives you X. But if it could just get a little bit more contextual about who
Mm.
Michael is, what Michael's business is, what he's interested in, how he wants to support his customers in that particular way, in that, if we're framing it in that manner. It could also be in terms of if Michael is really interested in health and fitness, in well-being, mental, emotional, and being able to pick up on certain triggers and go, actually, you know what, Michael, I can see you've been burning the midnight oil. You need to actually take a bit of a break. Step in at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. You'll be a lot more awake and your ideas will be a lot better because right now they're not.
Is it the bag split? No. You raise
But
a really, you raise a really fascinating point because you're right. Like it's not that far away from being unbelievably helpful, right? And I was creating something last night for the team and almost like not a manifesto, but like a creed or a kind of about how we do business here.
your
And
values, basically you're
exactly,
filling out your values. Yeah.
and I was like, how do I communicate that? But if you can understand a little bit more about, okay, who's, what some of the parameters are, what I believe to be maybe some, even my cultural piece, like I don't talk American because I'm born and bred and
Australia.
live in Australia. So you don't want, if you can understand that bit, which isn't that far away, right? It's maybe 2 or 3 questions away from being like unreal helpful. Yeah, I think that's what you're alluding to, and that really comes that alliance piece. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So it is starting to show some levels of awareness in the sense of, so a couple of the kind of really big AI podcasters and not podcasters, content creators out there that I follow have been testing a lot of the LLM in particular ways to be able to determine if there is any kind of theory of mind capability coming out. And based on their research, it is. And
Mhm.
so that gives me quite a bit of comfort. I do work with an AI company. I do some consulting with an AI company where we're developing capabilities around categorization, sentiment, intent. And that is also really interesting because you can see how that nuance can be pulled into many areas, just in terms of customer interaction, employee interaction, you interacting with your device, whatever the case may be. It can pick up your tonality, it can pick up the words that you're utilizing, the speed, all of that can start to play uh, in terms of the way that an AI should respond to you, because it's starting to contextualize. Okay, so I'm speaking to Michael. He is from Australia. So the way that I would want to create a rapport would be to use specific vernacular that would be associated to
Yeah.
his area. There might be different slang between Sydney versus Melbourne versus, yeah. And so bringing all of that into the way that you would speak would almost give you a sense of, even if it's subconscious, it was, I'm speaking to somebody from Queensland.
Yeah. 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 I think it doesn't seem like that too far away in terms of that's
No,
really
it's
interesting
not.
to hear. I guess the question is, I'm curious that I would imagine it probably exists, but not in a public domain. Like your ChatGPT, I feel like what it showed me was that it was like, wow, if this is publicly available, imagine what's not publicly available. You know what I mean? And then you go, crikey. And you think about defense. I was thinking about the medical context, how often you go to a medical appointment and you have to ask 300 questions before they even get to, okay, so how can I help you today? They just try and just the medical history piece. And in that domain, what you're talking about, that kind of cultural piece about drugs I've declined to take or things I've tried before, if you can understand that whole context, then it really can become far more powerful than a standard kind of skin bag like a GP. It becomes far more elevated from that capacity.
Yeah, you need two pieces of technology to pull that together and make it spectacular. So you would need to figure out standardization for blockchain, for a medical blockchain. I don't think they've come up with that yet. That will then allow you to store your health information in a secure way. And there are a couple companies I know that have started or tried or piloted, but I don't think there is like a universal one, because I think that would, at least at a country level, would be very useful. Then you would want to put on top of that the medical kind of analysis. So quite literally, before the doctor even opens up the case, your GPT has pretty much run through the entire case history, has looked at all the last blood results that have come in. You maybe even went for another blood checkup before, and it's literally done all of your analysis. You maybe did a bit of a questionnaire in terms of some of the foods that you've been eating over the last week. You can attempt to even try and drop that into maybe your Whoop device, so it actually starts tracking your sleeping, your exercise, your strength, your capability. So then it starts working out your metabolic rate, age, and it starts looking at potential symptoms. Maybe Michael runs 2-3 times a week, goes to the gym, considers surfing on the weekend, works too hard, and is suffering from maybe a bit of heart. And it can work out very quickly. Okay, so we need to drop this, pull this in, this medication with support, a little bit of rest and relaxation at this point is probably the best thing for Michael. So I absolutely, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical expert, but I've spent a little bit of time thinking about this and the kind of the course that it would need to run. So again, we are not that far away. So technically, the technology actually exists as it is today. And as you said, right now, we are not being told what is actually coming out. So even if I spent a huge amount of time, and I have of the last 2 years, just looking at, firstly, the previous 10 years in terms of what was discovered versus going forward. And I think a lot of the kind of the really big cutting edge stuff was very much out in the world. As of sort of 2, 3, maybe even 4 years ago, that became a lot more closed. And so I don't know what exactly is happening behind closed doors, but I'm pretty sure it's spectacular, because like by the time we got ChatGPT, it was 3.5. And yeah, so I think there is a huge amount that is not being shared with us, but eventually it has to come out and will come out, because at some point somebody's going to have to be a first mover into these technology spaces. And although ChatGPT was the first mover, Microsoft, Tesla, Anthropic, Google, like they're not going to be far behind. In fact, I think Anthropic has got the best large language model in terms of the current stats. That's what that information is probably about 3 weeks old now. So unfortunately, the space is moving so quickly, which is why I felt that it's less important focusing on the actual technology and the rate of change that is happening, because literally what you say from a week ago is old, outdated. And so we almost have to bring it back to what's important. So we need people. We need to have the right structures for ourselves as we go through the transition. But most importantly, we need to be aware that there is a transition that's coming, and that there are at least plans in place. The AI Act is about to be put into legislation in June, July. So that will be the first kind of piece of legislation, and it's a really big piece of legislation that is going to be put out into the global arena, that is ideally meant to protect people. Now, I don't know if that is necessarily always going to be the best route, and I don't know if it's gone far enough. Only time will really tell. But I think what is important is that I think we need to get really clear about how we want to govern ourselves from a standard perspective, how we want to be able to measure ourselves in terms of what good looks like. And yeah, I think trying to figure out what that good looks is going to be part of the challenge over the next sort of decade. Because I think if we focus just on the amount of money that is going to be thrown at us, I mean, there's a investor, Kathy Wood, who is she's betting the house and the house that she borrowed, money that she borrowed on the house, on some very big movers when it comes to AI. And as far as she's concerned, the 200 trillion in GDP that is going to be added to the world economy. That's insane. That's 3 times more than what we had in 2021 kind of thing. It just insane numbers. And I have no idea if she's right, but it's really interesting to see somebody like Kathy Wood, who has spent her entire life, she's now 60, so she would have spent 30, 40 years looking at technology and economic trends in technology to be able to make those bets and to make those calls. Whether you are PwC or KPMG and you think 15 or 18 trillion in terms of revenue being created out of generative AI, or 200 like Kathy Wood, there is going to be a lot of money that is going to be slashing around, but it's not going to be now. And I don't know what that is going to do for our psyche, because I think there are going to be a lot of big winners and there's going to be a lot of big losers. And yeah, it's not good when there is a lot of big losers.
I think that's probably a great place to leave this conversation, Lee. I think I've certainly enjoyed a kind of meditating, as it were, on this topic. And I think you've highlighted a number of key, I think your point there is that the technology which is coming is spectacular. I love that word that you use. And I think it's got the potential to be spectacular in terms of its integration. Leaders certainly found, leaders need to be aware, as you said, and be open to the change that it's going to create. And there's going to be opportunities. And again, like with anything, the car was amazing, and then you can die in a car crash. There's pros and cons with anything in terms of its opening up. Lee, huge thanks. We're going to link to the Human AI Alliance book in the show notes below. So strongly encourage people to take a look. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us, Lee. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Michael.